Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we are technically not live, but it's gonna be an incredibly busy day for me, so I'm recording this the morning before rather than attending to this later in the evening, because first I'm gonna be dragged off to, well, I've got two different social events to worry about today, one of which is a friend's wedding, so I probably will be around, so I'll be able to keep an eye on chat in case any of you are being silly, but otherwise, well, I'm not gonna want to do anything when I come back. So in case I'm either away for so long that I end up missing the usual stream start time for Saturday, or if it turns out that I'm just too exhausted even if I do arrive back on time, well, better make sure that I've at least got you guys seen to, right? So to that end, we're gonna look at the reaction video backlog. For those of you who don't know, since there's a decent number of new faces, I got bullied into doing reaction content by the small core audience I had before the free run video. And what it boiled down to is effectively just occasionally looking at a random video talking about media, sometimes looking at rumors, behind the scenes stuff, occasionally doing more critical work on a video, well, on a particular game, usually focused around gaming, sometimes about animation, sometimes about, well, legal stuff, all sorts of stuff. And since that my audience seems to have very different viewing habits than I do, it's made for something interesting to break things up every now and then. So I've got a selection of videos that I've been asked to look at, so we will just go down the line. So, first and foremost, since we've been on a since we've been on a tear with Xenoblade lately, there are a couple tucked away in here. So, what exactly is this one about? So, what's your channel focused on? Alright, so mostly Nintendo-based. So, world's least predictable video game company. Yep, that's an accurate description of it. Apologies if the text is a bit difficult to read, as this is a 4K ultra-wide that's been cropped down to 1080p, so, and it has been cropped, as you can see. So, it should be fine for our purposes, but even so. So, Vane, you probably think this gameplay aesthetic is about you, huh? So, I have no idea what to expect from this channel. I'm not entirely sure how one of the regular viewers found it, but you know what? Let's see what it has to say for itself.
Why is Xenoblade like this? And this? And this? Do you see it? Do you see what I'm getting at? This is nothing against the games, which I enjoy very much indeed, but...
No, when I say it, yes, it is against the game. The interface is too cluttered.
Just aesthetically, how many other titles would even consider having this level of eyeball-searing complexity on the screen at once?
Modern-day Ubisoft?
Plenty of games have intricate HUDs and show on-screen information, but it seems characteristic of very Japanese-centric gameplay experiences, such as those from Monolith Soft, that this level of density is even considered as a gameplay option.
Yes, I know Monolith worked on Tears of the Kingdom as well, but they weren't the lead developers. Well, the stuff that they were working on was critical for both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, though, to be fair, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are not as mechanically complex, and that is some of the drawback that you run into with JRPGs in general. The fact that, hey, we have all these ways that we're trying to we're giving you all of these options in order to min-max, and because there's all this information that they're trying to deliver to you at once, it can get very cluttered in a hurry. I don't necessarily blame Monolith Soft for how cluttered stuff in Xenoblade can get, although I feel like they've done a decent job with it in 3, though then again, I have had a few weeks to get used to it at this point, a few months actually, with how slowly I tend to get through stuff, but either way.
My curiosity on this issue actually led me to do some research, and I came across some interesting discoveries about the way Japanese people process information compared to people in the West.
Is that just a matter of how they've learned to process information, or is it a matter of... okay, interesting way to frame it. I'll be curious to see where you take that.
This isn't a traditional Nintendo Forecast video, whack the playlist on screen if you'd rather watch one of those, but every few weeks I like to try a video that shakes up the formula a little bit, and this one is really, I guess, a cultural deep dive as to how information is presented in games, and in particular, why Xenoblade games are as information dense as they are. If that's for you, settle in for another Nintendo Forecast Deep Dive. So to give some context to how I came upon this issue at all, one of the most frequently requested videos on this channel is a deep dive into Monolith Soft in the vein of my other deep dives into Intelligent Systems, Bandai Namco, and Nintendo EPD.
Oh, the Intelligent Systems one might be worth checking out at some point, given how much time I've spent with Fire Emblem, and with how much I'm going to be talking about Engage at some point in the next year.
Eventually I do plan to get to this, but my response is always the same, that my backlog includes the Xenoblade Chronicles games, and I really want to complete the Switch trilogy before I do the kind of in-depth research necessarily that will likely lead me to spoiling myself. Currently, I'm making my way through Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and while I wouldn't say either of these titles so far are at the absolute pinnacle of my favourites given how competitive the Switch is, it's still a gem of a game with a huge amount to recommend it, as was its predecessor.
I'm not sure how much I would recommend Xenoblade 2, actually, because the way that I would describe the Xenoblade games is that they are JRPGs for JRPG fans. I think that's probably the best way to put it. For someone like me coming into it the first time, it did take a little bit to acclimate because of that. And I think the fascinating part that I can bring up in that count is when I was first playing, when I played the first Xenoblade Chronicles, because I bought the definitive edition thinking, okay, I've heard a lot of good things about this. A lot of vagaries, to be fair, because the Xenoblade fan base really likes to keep the story details under wrap, and within the first chapter you find out why. But what had happened is that I had gone through the majority of Chapter 1 on stream thinking, there's a decent amount of downtime as you're traveling to and from a place, and there's also plenty more to worry about, and there's a decent amount of what felt like busy work at the time, a matter of, okay, you've got monsters in the way, you can attempt to run away from them, but do you really want to, because you don't know how much grinding you'll need to do, because JRPG. So, the first time I streamed it, I was thinking, did I make a mistake doing this? Should I convert this to a Let's Play? Ironic considering what I'm doing for Xenoblade 2's New Game Plus, but still, what ended up happening there is I stream it the first time, think, I don't know about this, but we'll give it the good old college try. We'll give it another attempt next week. And then I hit the end of Chapter 1 and I'm sat there going, oh, okay, I'm on board now. That story is absolutely worth focusing on now. Okay, you have my attention. And to be fair, it is a bit of a fake out to say everything and nothing, as they do they do try and maintain the stakes differently from how they present the stakes in that moment. Though, to be fair, at least from what I've seen of 2 and 3, they are not prepared to be brutal. Let's put it that way. So, I suppose at the end of the day, it has gotten me to play the other 2 games, so can't complain too much, right? Either way, back to the video.
But there's no doubt that one of the most onerous aspects of the game, as a filthily casual time-poor gamer, is navigating the learning curve and getting to grips with the astonishing complexity of the world mechanics, a level of complexity that makes Dungeons & Dragons look like snakes and ladders.
No, they're about equivalent. You have spoken as someone who has not seen the kind of bullshit that people have pulled out within Dungeons & Dragons. My God. Because I am admittedly not someone who digs too deeply into the D&D rulebook to try and figure out the optimal way to min-max, but I am in a group that has a couple of those people, and my God, even within just 5th edition, there is some absurd stuff you can do with that combat system. So, no, I'd consider them about equivalent. The difference being, though, that in a tabletop setting, you have the Dungeon Master who can homebrew or effectively just play it by ear when necessary, to where, assuming the Dungeon Master is doing his job correctly, though to be fair, there's a lot of different styles for that. If the Dungeon Master is doing his job correctly, then, in theory, there should be a bit of push and pull where, okay, this is going to be hilarious if I allow you to do this, even if it's not strictly allowed in the rulebook. Or, I'm going to put the kibosh on this because I don't believe this is necessarily in character for you to do. Are you sure about this? Or, the Dungeon Master can outright say, are you sure, as a tacit warning that, hey, be mindful that this is a bad idea. So, with D&D, it's a little different because there is the Dungeon Master that you intentionally play off of, but in terms of complexity, I would put them on about the same level.
And which means that tens of hours in, you're still being introduced to new tutorials for different mechanics.
Well, that in itself isn't necessarily a problem, but carry on.
Mechanics which, in the case of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 specifically, they don't store in your tutorials list afterwards, meaning you have to pay close attention or get onto Google post-haste in order to keep up.
Now that is a legitimate issue, and the other problem that I have with the tutorials in Xenoblade 2 is that it's presented very, for lack of a better word, conversationally. It's a matter of, hey, there's this aspect, but oh, here's this aspect. So the way that I describe the tutorials is that it's how someone who is more casual about the game would describe the mechanics after seeing them. Potentially, assuming that they have at least a decent understanding of it. So, I don't know. It's definitely not very well presented.
What I'm saying is that Xenoblade is a game that innately prizes and focuses on complexity and makes no concessions to the audience on this front.
I probably shouldn't be looking at this because I'm pretty sure this is DLC stuff I'll eventually be seeing, but never mind.
But still, the actual information present on screen at times is absolutely vast. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom or the Fire Emblem titles also contain large amounts of information on screen. They have complex HUDs and there's quite a lot to spot, but generally they don't overwhelm with information in quite the same way that Xenoblade sometimes does.
Well, the benefit that Fire Emblem has is that it is a turn-based game. And so, if you are trying to min-max and be very careful, which I've had to do for my Manning run, still ongoing admittedly, what I've had to do there is I've had to be very careful as to how much damage is going to be inflicted on my units. At least if I say, oh, I need you to step up, are you going to be okay if I put you on a specific point? So I'll check, okay, you'll be in range of this enemy, he has this strength, you have this defense, okay, so you'll be fine. So I've had to be very careful on that front to make sure that I'm not throwing my units into any lethal danger, let's put it that way, although there is always the risk of a critical hit. And because I have the opportunity to unwind, stand back and observe the field, it is easier to digest there. Although, I do have my complaints with Engage's UI, specifically the fact that they put the Engage button before the attack order, the Engage order before the attack order, but still, that's a topic for another time.
And my contention is that this is because Zelda and to some degree Fire Emblem have been made with a far greater awareness of the tastes of a Western audience.
That I could believe, given the circumstances, because if memory serves... Well, actually, Fire Emblem, I don't know if that necessarily applies, because it is still very niche. Three Houses did attract a new audience by virtue of the fact that it backed off a lot on the typical anime tropes, or in some cases outright subverted them with characters like Sylvain. But the difference being is that, well, with Three Houses, I think there was a dev interview a while back, and I could probably pull up the link if I dug out my script for the game. I believe there was a dev interview that explicitly said that Three Houses and Engage were developed alongside each other, with Three Houses being intended as more of a mature story, intended for late teens to young adults, while Engage was geared toward a wider audience, with that phrase being just as much of a concern as you might expect, but either way. Which is why the Engage is more colorful. A lot of the rougher edges of the characters are sanded down in exchange for colorful caricatures, and the characters win through the power of friendship. So, it definitely is a very different tone, but I feel like I think there is some truth to it still, but I suspect it doesn't necessarily apply to the interface specifically, more to the style of story.
In fact, the Zelda games, while hugely successful for Nintendo, are more dramatic successes in Western markets than in Japan.
Well, there are admittedly more people out in the Western market than in Japan specifically, though I'd be curious to know the per capita number.
But Xenoblade is intrinsically Japanese in spirit and style, something that's never more apparent in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, with its goofy departures into Japanese humour.
Yeah, the Blades especially can get incredibly grating during their Blade quests. Incredibly grating. Unironically, I have the same problem with Xenoblade 2's Blade Quest as I do with Engage's story in general.
And while these aspects are the most obvious examples of it being a highly Japanese game...
Also, you deployed Boucheron out after Chapter 11? What is wrong with you?
It also has a very Asian approach to information presentation. As an example of what I mean, let's take a step back from the games for a second and consider East Asian website design. Text tends to be small and there tends to be an awful lot of it. There seem to be more columns, more bright icons, and sometimes flashing elements to the Western eye.
I mean, that is how websites used to be developed in the West as well. This actually is very. I mean, look up old school websites sometimes. There are still a few There's still a few time capsules of this style of website lingering about, so you'd be surprised. This actually isn't too far away from how the Western market used to design websites either.
It can often seem overwhelming, but it seems that to a Japanese eye, this design is actually rather reassuring. Japan is a nation with a much more conformist culture than many Western countries.
Interesting. Actually, I'm surprised how different the subtitles are in that. I'm curious. There should be a transcript. So is the transcript at least... interesting. So, were the subtitles put in... Well, actually, what are the subtitles right now? Okay, they're not auto-generated, so... Okay, so they were put in presumably by the video maker then. Okay. Well, to be fair, that is a good way to condense down your points. To just say Japan is, broadly speaking, a conformist nature instead of getting rid of all the fluff and extra words on your video. But if you're at the point where you feel, okay, I probably do need to condense down and make it easier to understand for the subtitles, you probably should have done this in the first place.
While the philosophers of the West, and particularly in America, trend towards a focus on the primacy of independence, freedom, standing out and asserting points of difference, this remains anathema for many African and Asian traditions. An Apple-style, sleek, individualistic approach requires a mindset different from the norm, and the norm is to bombard people with complexity. And Japanese people appear to prefer this. People like to avoid risk, and when purchasing items, the average Japanese consumer likes to know that there is a lot of information being provided. Think about the many sights and sounds of Tokyo. Times Square may seem busy and provides a bit of information overload, but it's nothing on the likes of Shibuya.
It might have been good, if you're going to show this, I know I can't really talk too much on this because my editing skills aren't the greatest either, but if you're going to talk about this, it might be good to get a comparison between Times Square and Shibuya, because I know of Shibuya from manga and whatnot, but I don't know much about it. And given that I'm someone who has spent some total of an hour in New York City and hated it, so telling me that Shibuya is worse without necessarily showing me why, as far as the amount of noise and the amount of stuff bombarding your senses, it would be good to have at least a point of comparison, and visually as well, instead of just having trailer footage in the background.
Remember also that Japanese is a language which does not have capital letters, and which between its two alphabets has a large amount of characters compared to most Western alphabets, even before you include the roughly 50,000 kanji characters and the frequent use of Latin script.
That would make things confusing, admittedly, although, given how much they have as far as that, given how specific they can be with kanji, I suspect that also influences things. The fact that for Advanced Wars the names have to be fairly simple, but in Japanese I suspect that it would be a lot easier to work with a lower character count just because of the language. Though, to be fair, I don't know enough Japanese to say that definitively.
They're used to having a vast amount of symbols conveying information quite precisely, but generally without emphasis or hierarchy in terms of the presentation. Sticking with websites for a second, it's interesting to look at Nintendo's own site. As with most of their content these days, the Nintendo website design is standardized across the regions to a very large degree, and I think therefore we see here a kind of balance of both kinds of aesthetics. It's far less complicated than the minimalist look of many major Western tech sites such as Google and Apple.
I'm not sure Google is necessarily the best example since it's a search engine and needs to be straightforward, but carry on.
But it's not nearly so dripping with information as the Japanese retailers.
Actually, a better comparison would be Amazon.
And that's because they want one consistent corporate approach that offers consumers in the East the level of complexity that is reassuring to them, but also to make their web offer accessible to Western audiences who favour clarity and simplicity. Now, I think there's a good case to say that this affects the way Xenoblade Chronicles is constructed. If you play a Xenoblade game, you really need to play it as a Japanese gamer would, and think of its seemingly endless rabbit warren of menus and optical migraine of on-screen icons in the way that people from East Asia appeared to, not as alarming or overwhelming, but comforting.
Funny you mentioned that because, ironically, I am used to complexity, but I'm used to complexity in the CRPG style of things, where I have my convenient keyboard and mouse, where instead of nested menus, I have things laid out in charts and whatnot. So, you want an example of that? You can check out the streams I did on Pillars of Eternity.
The way the game offers you freedom is to tell you literally everything, often all at once, but that means that you as the player are there to navigate this complexity and to master it. As a relatively new player to the series, there have certainly been moments where I've chafed against the game's density and I can't say I've got to grips, or even feel likely to get to grips, with all the innumerable systems that the title offers.
Admittedly, I did have to do a fair amount of exterior research to figure out, okay, how do I want to take on the endgame stuff, especially for Xenoblade 2. My gosh, it's going to be a long time before all that's finished.
But I do get the relaxing quality of the game, that sometimes the grinding and the wandering and the becoming lost in the game's myriad menus and vast item list grant a different kind of freedom.
Admittedly, I do wonder if it was the right idea to stream my playthroughs of Xenoblade for exactly that reason, because there is, and I think this is something I chafed against with Xenoblade 1 especially, well, the first one, and reason being is that when you are streaming, there is always that inherent pressure in the back of your mind of, okay, you need to be saying something, you need to make sure that the people watching you are engaged, you need to make sure that everything is working as it should, that you're interacting with chat, that you are paying attention, that you are coming up with interesting things to say, and sometimes there's just a point when you're playing a game like this where there's just not a lot happening and you're just sat there either listening to information being processed or you're just wandering the landscape, and that I don't think necessarily lends itself as well to a live streaming environment. I think it does well enough for the sake of what I'm doing for Xenoblade 2's New Game Plus, but otherwise, we'll see how it plays out, I suppose, with the third game, though I'm thinking the next time that I do this kind of reaction content, it might be interesting to try and have that, use that as an opportunity to do that exploration with Xenoblade 3, where I could just have either the game or the video off in a corner, and then I can just treat whatever reaction content is on the docket for the night as second monitor content as I look around for landmarks or unique monsters to go after. Could be an interesting way to approach it.
Of course, Nintendo is a company with an international outlook, and this does raise the question of whether Monolith Soft would ever adjust their approach to menus to cater to a Western audience.
I mean, to be fair, there is somewhat of a shift that's been happening lately, for better or worse, within Japanese companies, where they have noticed the sheer amount of interest that the rest of the world has in their cultural output. And there has been somewhat of a shift in the approach, such as moving Sony's headquarters to California. So I'll be curious to see how much of that ends up lingering and how much of how much they decide, how much they recognize, no, you want our stuff for our stuff. We're going to keep it as it is, and if you don't like it, so be it. We're able to do just fine as it is. Though, to be fair, there are a lot of people competing in the media space. In the East and West, to be fair.
Witcher, Elden Ring, and Breath of the Wild are all games that really face their Western audiences, and while they are information dense, they feel a little more aesthetically sparse compared to moments in Xenoblade.
Again, Ubisoft Open World. I think there was a joke going around where I think it was when Elden Ring came out, I think a bunch of UI designers in the Western world, or at least of some game devs, were complaining on, I think it was Twitter, about how the user interface in Elden Ring was designed and how they found it, I don't think problematic is the right word, but felt that it wasn't as effective as it should be as far as the information shown. And then I think shortly after, there was a meme put up of what it would look like if it were in Ubisoft Open World, where you have all these markers of here's all the points of interest on the map, here's all the information, here's your side quest tracker and all that fun stuff. So, I don't know. I don't know if it's necessarily complexity of information. I'm not sure how much I agree with the thesis, but I suppose I would need more examples to narrow it down properly.
In particular, I appreciate the way that Tears of the Kingdom focuses a lot on signposting within the game world to nudge players with slightly different coloured rocks indicating a bombable wall as opposed to a neon blue icon. That's partly reflective of being a different kind of game with a very different history, and of course Zelda has always had bombable walls if you look carefully enough.
Also, yes, this is another reason why you'd want to be, it's good to have that information, but it's good to put that information in the subtitles as well.
But also, I think, accounts for how well it translates out of the developer's home region. I think there must be some kind of soft pressure exerted on Monolith Soft to try to open up the game's intricate systems, but equally the studio is 3% owned by its founders, and Nintendo is very good.
Well, not anymore anyway.
But at respecting, even revering, people of true creative genius and letting them do their own thing.
Honestly, I'm kind of surprised given that Xenoblade isn't... Well, Xenoblade does well nowadays, but I'm honestly kind of surprised that Monolith is given as much freedom as it is to be as eccentric as it is. Because I suspect the main reason for that is because they have been a critical support studio on their big hits, to where there seems to be this understanding that, hey, you help us get our big blockbuster Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom going, you help us figure out some of the technical stuff for Animal Crossing New Horizons, you help us with that, and then you can then just have the rest of your developers go off in a corner and come up with all sorts of eccentric stuff. We'll put that out there, and honestly, it seems to be working out pretty damn well for them, but I'll be curious to see how long that lasts. I suppose it'll depend on what's next for Zelda after Echoes of Wisdom.
What would be the point of doing more Xenoblade if Xenoblade became a watered-down shadow of its former self? They're also an intrinsically Japanese company, so they understand how to target a Japanese market, even if it sometimes doesn't lead to them capturing the broad audiences of a Mario or Zelda in the rest of the world.
And nothing wrong with that.
Therefore, I would not expect that much to change, and I rather hope it doesn't.
Also, ironic to have I think it's no, it's not Gower Plains, it's Colony 9, just wandering out in the world. All this cheery music, and meanwhile Torna is being destroyed.
What might change, of course, is a convergence of different tastes over time. With the advent of the internet and the trend towards people being more and more exposed to art and media from other cultures, K-pop and Bollywood and Scandi noir, it's possible that we will start to see a greater appreciation for different international approaches. Younger Japanese developers may feel less
Should I be seeing this right now?
wedded to ultra-dense methods of presenting information, while people abroad who have grown up with the likes of Xenoblade will become
That was a weird pause.
more accepting of it. I'm not sure I can put a forecast on this, as it's a bit too abstract a concept to nail down, but I think there's a chance that Japanese design philosophies could change quite a bit in the decades to come to accommodate a variety of tastes, while hopefully keeping what made these games so distinctive and original in the first place.
Also, I'm starting to wonder if I should be watching this, since I know basically nothing about Future Redeemed outside of... outside of the original trailer. I have intentionally kept myself in the dark on it, and I'm honestly shocked at how little I actually know of it.
At any rate, I found this a rather interesting diversion, and it kind of makes sense and contextualises the game for me. Game reactions aren't really this channel's focus, but if you'd be interested in my thoughts on these Xenoblade titles as a new player, do let me know. It'll be a while before I get there though, as I'm still relatively early in 2, and with Famicom Detective Club and Echoes of Wisdom on the slate, it may be some time before I even finish that title.
Yeah, to be fair, it took me a while to get through Echoes of Wisdom as well. The fact that I've only just finished the majority of audio editing for my own review. To be fair, Echoes of Wisdom is more a game that's better seen in short bursts staggered over a few weeks, but either way.
I know that this channel has viewers from across the world, including in places like Korea, China and Japan, so I would be very interested to hear other perspectives on this. And as ever, feel free to like, subscribe, comment, share, dive into the Patreon or link below, and or check out one of these videos on screen for more. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.
Alright, so I'm not sure I wholly agree with the thesis, but definitely prompted some interesting discussion, so no complaints there. Alrighty, so next on the docket, I had mentioned something about the flute with Xenoblade 3, because it sounded very distinct and I wasn't entirely sure how they were getting the sound. And my sister does play the flute, or at least did at one point. I'll have to see what she's been up to with that lately, but still, may as well see. Well, and because I had mentioned it in passing, this came up as something to check out, so let's take a look. I wonder how they designed that flute. I'll have to dig in more to... Well, I'll have to dig more into how it was created as well. There might be a dev interview for same. There one in the... No description, huh? And there's the other flute. Okay, intentionally designed to where it has a different character to it, huh? Neat. I'll have to do comparisons with the other Offseer flutes that we run into. See if there's anything unique. See if they're unique to the character, or if they're unique to Agnes or Kebes. Alrighty then. Neat. Okay, so I'm gonna be skipping around a little bit as I had 5 videos on the docket, though given that we had a 9-minute video and we're half an hour in, to be fair, bearing in mind we also had introductions, I don't think I'll be able to get to my entire docket this time. So, because I only have about a couple of hours before, well actually, only an hour if I want to give myself adequate time to prepare for the rest of my day. Because you're getting me you're getting me at the start of my day with me just sipping on tea. I could have been doing retakes for Echoes of Wisdom, but here I am. Still, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave one particular video alone for now. Given that I likely don't have time for it, I'll just add it to the docket for another day. Instead, I'm going to skip to this one. So, this one was originally sold to me as the Nintendo lawsuit you've never heard of, and it looks like the title was changed in between when the video was recommended and now. So, I'm not familiar with this channel, so let's see what you have to say for yourself. So what have you been up to lately? Over a different aspect of video game history, from Animal Crossing's sound design to why Link from Zelda's... Oh, really? Well. And then... Let's see. So, another Nintendo channel primarily talking about the company more broadly speaking, so... Let's see. Decent output given the subject matter. I'd be curious to know how much effort I'll be curious to know how much effort is put into the editing component. Still, if you've got that many subs, you can usually manage to do this full time, although... with that viewership, it'd be tricky but with a Patreon, that seems workable. Alrighty, let's see what you've got for us.
Nintendo has a reputation for being rather trigger-happy when it comes to lawsuits.
See Palworld.
If you're a Sonic fan and want to draw Sonic fan art or even make a Sonic fan game, you're free to do so.
And I'm honestly surprised that Sega even allows that. Hell, the fact that I think they had effectively said, hey, can we use these emulators when putting out Sega Mega Drive and Genesis classics? I think they had done some sort of emulator. I can't remember if it was sourced from a fan or if they had been working with one in order to get it. I can't remember the exact tale behind it. Shame that that's been delisted, Sega. But what, you're going to be reselling all that in separate packages or with Denuvo tacked on or something? You know what, that's probably exactly what they're doing. But anyway, that's beside the point.
Not only does Sega turn a blind eye to this fan content, they've even hired members of the fan game community.
Okay, well, I guess that technically answers my question, given that they brought people on for Sonic Mania, or at least different devs entirely, but never mind that.
Nintendo, though, is the opposite. The company has issued hundreds of takedown requests for Mario and Zelda fan games. According to late Nintendo president Satoru Iwata, the only fan content Nintendo takes down is that which socially diminishes the dignity or value of our intellectual properties.
That is a very broad statement, though, given, well, especially in legal terms, because one could argue that a fan game distracts from the main games as well, so effectively, if it gets enough attention, that'll be an issue. Although it also does explain why they don't go after emulators outside of the most recent hardware. The fact that Citra was only collateral damage rather than something they actively pursued. The fact that they don't go after stuff like Visual Boy Advance or even Dolphin.
In other words, draw Mario jumping around the Mushroom Kingdom and you'll probably be fine. But put a knife in his hand and you can expect a knock at the door from Nintendo.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, that's one way to describe it anyway. Another would be, well, the problem is value is something that can be very difficult to describe in legal terms, or just in general. What are you considering the value of a product, of a piece of artwork or a bit of intellectual property? That's where things get thorny.
Except, in practice, that doesn't seem to be true. Over the last decade and a half, we've seen almost every major Nintendo fan game get removed from the internet.
I don't necessarily think it's outside that statement, given what I just said, actually. So I think we already have a bit of a disagreement, but let's see where you take this.
The Pokemon company's even worse. Pokemon Uranium, a fan game in development for 9 years, was taken off the internet less than 2 weeks after release.
Yes, because it was branded as if it was a new Pokemon version, which is exactly why it got removed, and why Pokemon Showdown doesn't get brought down either. So, presumably anyway, given that mechanically it's very different. Although, actually, I'm kind of surprised it isn't on that count. Either way. So, all that to say, how you define value is going to have a major effect on what they do. Because it seems that for fan games, Pokemon Uranium as well, you could argue that could also invoke other concerns as well, given, the history of the West and Japan interacting, let's put it that way.
Ouch. So when I tell you that in 2017, Nintendo filed a $29 million lawsuit against another game developer, alleging that they'd infringed on Nintendo's patents.
Oh god, they've done it before?
Well, you'd be forgiven for thinking that this was yet another case of Nintendo abusing their legal power.
In Palworld's case, I think there's some concern over the fact that the patents literally didn't exist before Palworld was released into early access, though I need to go and check the veracity of that claim.
But by the end of this video, I'll show you that not only did Nintendo have the legal right to sue this company, but doing so may well have helped the entire games industry.
That last part might be difficult to believe, because I think there was one time where I was asked to react to a video. I think it was the legal or copyright dispute over the Tearing saga, when the original creator of Fire Emblem broke away and tried to do his own thing, because originally the lawsuit against him had failed, and they had simply said, okay, I'll just name it something different, but then they retried it and were able to cite something in a dev interview where the way it was framed, Nintendo actually ended up being in the right on that count.
Let me tell you about the one morally good Nintendo lawsuit.
Alright, you've got a high bar to reach with that one, but let's have it out.
Part 1. The Code of Honor.
I don't know if you necessarily need to say your titles or cards out loud, but never mind me. I guess if you're treating this as second monitor content, it isn't the worst thing ever, but still.
So we need to start with a short history lesson. Back when arcade games were just breaking through into the mainstream, the Japanese games industry faced a problem with patents. According to industry analyst Hisakazu Hirabayashi, around the time arcades spread across Japan, patent disputes were frequent.
Unsurprising at all. Hell, patent disputes are a common thing in the tech industry in general because, especially when it comes to software.
As you know, patents can be applied for by anyone, even if they're not the manufacturer of the product in question. Under this system, there were often incidents where complete outsiders from the games industry registered patents relating to popular games.
Really?
This posed a real threat to the fledgling games industry, but studios soon responded. They began patenting almost every idea they had, even totally basic ones.
Oh, is this why Nintendo was so trigger happy? Huh. Ironic, because they probably couldn't win on a copyright or fair use against Palworld, so that's what. Is this why they went the patent route? Even if it is legal bullying, but never mind that.
SNK patented the idea of the title screen.
You effing what, mate?
Namco apparently patented the high score list.
How the hell did that remain in place? Did it remain in place? I wish you would tell me if these remained in place.
You might think this would totally stifle innovation in the world of arcade games, but that's not what happened. None of these companies actually enforced their patents against each other.
Oh? I mean, to be fair, EA, for some of their accessibility patents, have done something similar, although that is the danger that you play, because I think the big thing that people, well, there are two major things that people are annoyed at with patents lately, or have been recently. One of them is Nintendo acting like a bully toward Palworld, since I've mentioned it a bunch already. Another is as a result of the Nemesis system that was introduced with Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor. Effectively, the whole idea that, hey, you get killed by an orc, it'll show up more powerful and have a grudge against you. So that sort of thing, that's patented. And Warner Brothers has sat on that without doing anything with it. And because they haven't made it clear that, hey, you can use that system if you're willing to fork over some money, and to be fair, do people want to fork over the money just to use that idea? We have literally not had another game like that, outside of the two Middle-earth games. And hopefully whatever Monolith is working on, though not to be confused with Monolith Soft before you ask.
Heck, they knew that a lot of the patents wouldn't hold up in court anyway. No, the real purpose of registering all these patents was to stop companies outside the industry from registering them first and using them to extort game manufacturers.
Okay, so effectively trying to get ahead of the patent trolls then, huh? Okay. I guess that would be the logical conclusion, so it makes sense.
This was, in a weird way, the industry uniting against a common threat.
Although, I believe there is at least some minor cost in registering a patent, though, because my father works with 3D printers. The joke that I introduced, the joking way I introduced that is that he works with deadly lasers that could take your arm off, because he got a PhD in physics specializing in lasers that could take your arm off. Which, it did so, but it's all funny because it's true. But anyway, so he actually has he's been in the industry long enough, or been working with 3D printers long enough, because 3D printers have actually been around for a really long time, but the reason that we saw a resurgence of them showing up in, I think, the 2010s, is because all the patents ran out. And some of the code that my father wrote in C++, or it might have been straight C, back when I was 5 years old, so late 90s, early 2000s, maybe even before that actually, is still being used in some 3D printers to this day. So, either way, all that to say, I believe there is a cost to register your patents if this patent office in Japan is anything like the US, though, to be fair, I'll need to research how similar or different they are, but interesting that they would be willing to take that financial hit in the moment to try and stave off what could be far worse issues later down the line, which, to be fair, registering a patent versus getting into a protracted legal battle over something you own but someone else claimed, yeah, I think I could understand why you do that.
According to Hirabayashi, the reason why there were no fierce legal battles was that game manufacturers operated under a kind of code of honor. You might have violated my patents, but I might have violated yours too.
Okay, so it effectively became the nuclear deterrent.
Or I might violate them in the future. And this system of patenting almost every possible idea has continued on right up to the present day at companies such as Nintendo. Former Nintendo of America employees, Kit and Krista, have talked about how Nintendo's developers are encouraged to register any and every new game mechanic or idea as a patent.
That explains things.
Most of the time, it's like, just patent on all of it as much as you can, because you don't know what you might use.
For The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, Nintendo registered a whopping 31 patents, covering everything from the game's unique physics system to aspects of the loading screen. However, if you think back, you might have noticed something. Have you ever seen a single news story of Nintendo weaponizing their patents against another game manufacturer?
Well, apart from the recent example I keep bringing up.
I'm not saying it never happens, but it's extremely rare. You might say that even if they're not weaponizing them, Nintendo shouldn't be registering so many patents. And in an ideal world, I agree. But in 2013, the exact thing arcade manufacturers were trying to prevent happened to Nintendo. A company outside the games industry sued Nintendo for their Wii motion controls.
Oh, and that would really suck if they lost that as well, given just how popular the Wii ended up being in the casual market. Oh god, okay, I can already see where this is going.
Apparently, the Wii Remote violated the patents of a company called iLife. It took 7 years for the case to finally be dismissed.
Oh boy.
So, Nintendo registers all these patents to stop them being registered by someone else first. But do they use them against other game makers? Almost never. And it all comes back to that code of honor from the era of Space Invaders. But in 2008, a new company entered the games industry called Kolopla, and it didn't seem
Is that how you pronounce it? You know what, British, I'm not gonna question it too much.
like Kolopla was willing to follow this long-standing code of honor.
Well, to be fair, interesting that was necessary though, because isn't Japan a fairly high trust society given how, regardless.
Part 2, a year of discussions. So, in 2003, a man called Naruratsu Baba developed a mobile game called Colony Life. It was just a side project, as Baba had a full-time job at the time. But this game steadily grew in popularity. In 2005, Baba updated it with a new title, Colony Life Plus. And by 2008,
yeah, that's how they get you.
he made the decision to leave his job, dedicate all his time to Colony Life Plus, and form a company named after the game.
Okay, so that's... Alright, that might explain the weird pronunciation. Fair enough.
Colony became Colo, and Plus became Pla. And that
Okay, forget my smarmy comments about the pronunciation. I will retract that.
is how the Japanese mobile game studio Kolopla was formed. As the years have gone by, Kolopla has expanded. There are now over 800 employees at the company,
Respectable.
and a range of successful mobile games. Kolopla has even acquired a number of other game makers, including Eighting and Mages. We'll come to those in a bit.
Oh.
But in 2014, Kolopla launched their biggest, most successful game to date, a mobile action RPG called Shironeko or White Cat Project. To control your character in Shironeko Project, you drag your finger across the screen.
That's fairly standard stuff nowadays, but this was 2014, so is that the patent they're gonna be disputing then?
You can even drag in specific directions to use a special attack. The developers called this system Punicon, which can be roughly translated as bouncy controls or springy controls.
I mean, roughly translated, so I don't know how much that would necessarily work, but never mind.
This Punicon system allows players to play using just one hand, and these types of simple controls are great for smartphone games. Unfortunately, Punicon is where the trouble started for Kolopla. Let me show you this patent, which Nintendo applied for in 2004 and was granted in 2006. It describes a system for a kind of on-screen joystick. Now, there's a lot of technical detail here, but the core idea of this patent is that wherever you place your stylus or finger, the joystick follows.
Okay, so effectively just formalizing the idea behind a stylus being used for a touchscreen. Okay. I feel like that would have been easily applied before then, as I'm pretty sure stylus and touch controls have been around for a while, though I don't know if... Well, I'll have to see how much how much click and drag was present before the DS.
With a regular on-screen control stick, it's easy to lose track of the control area and start dragging around the wrong part of the screen. But instead, Nintendo's patent describes a system where you can drag anywhere on screen and the joystick will come to you. You can see this idea in action in Super Mario 64 DS.
Well, there you go.
So, that sounds a little similar to the Punicon control scheme from Shironeko Project, right? However, it's also similar to the control schemes found in many different mobile games. Despite Shironeko Project becoming extremely popular, Nintendo initially left the game alone. Again, this seems to come down to that code of honor when it comes to patents in the video game industry.
And what changed with Palworld then? Now I have questions.
However, it's at this point that Kalopla made a big misstep. They filed for a patent on the Punicon control scheme. According to game industry veteran Yoshiki Okamoto, who's worked at Konami and Capcom, Kalopla notified other companies that the Punicon control scheme was patented and that they weren't allowed to use it, unless, of course, they paid a fee. This obviously goes against the code of honor regarding patents, and I think it's pretty slimy. If no other company in the mobile games industry is allowed to use these on-screen joysticks, then how are players meant to control those games' main characters? The only option at that point is to pay up. Not great.
Or if you can somehow prove that the patent is too generic that it just doesn't hold water. Although the problem is that... I'm trying to... But if Nintendo already had something similar, if only applied to a stylus, could that patent even hold up in court? Though I suppose that would be the test. You throw it into the water, and people don't necessarily want to go through a legal hurdle, so even the threat of a lawsuit is enough to discourage some.
And so, it's at this point in the story when Nintendo finally gets involved. In 2016, Nintendo privately notified Kalopla that their game was infringing on a number of Nintendo patents, in particular, their 2006 joystick patent. But Kalopla held firm, and for a whole year, the two companies had a series of back and forth discussions about whether Shironeko Project's control scheme was infringing on Nintendo's patent.
By technicality, it probably was.
Kalopla's president and founder, Naruratsu Baba, even visited Nintendo in their home city of Kyoto. But the two companies couldn't find common ground. We have spent more than a year sincerely and politely explaining that our games do not infringe Nintendo's patent rights, but they did not accept our explanation, said.
I'd be curious to know what the explanations are, because I don't think there would be that much of a distinction if it's a stylus being used for this as opposed to a finger, because in theory it would have the same purpose at the end of the day. I don't know if it would necessarily be distinct enough for the sake of a patent,
said Naruratsu Baba. Eventually, after a year of these discussions, Nintendo ran out of patience. And in December 2017, the company decided it was time to sue.
I'm kind of surprised they waited that long.
Part 3, the lawsuit. December 22nd, 2017. This is the day Nintendo filed their lawsuit, claiming that Kalopla violated 5 Nintendo patents. They sought damages of 4.4 billion yen, or around 29 million US dollars.
Jeez.
January 10th, 2018. Nintendo told press about their lawsuit. After more than a year of discussions, we are very disappointed that we were unable to reach an agreement, they said. Kalopla responded, "There is absolutely no evidence that our games infringe on Nintendo's patent rights."
Absolutely no evidence. That's a very strong statement. I'm kind of surprised that that passed corporate.
And they stated their intention to defend the case. February 16th, 2018, Nintendo and Kalopla's lawyers began their battle at Tokyo District Court. This is the day the first oral arguments in the case were heard. March 14th, 2018, Nintendo added a 6th patent to their lawsuit related to Shironeko Project's online features.
Wait, hang on, what? So first it was just a matter of, controls using a touchscreen, but now you're trying to add online features to it? What kind of online features? Well, first of all, it's Nintendo. What kind of online features did they patent that actually work? But that's beside the point.
February 19th, 2020, Kalopla updated Shironeko Project and changed the way that the Punicon control stick worked. Before, you'd drag to use your special attacks, But now you tapped a button. It seemed they hoped this would differentiate it from Nintendo's patent.
Unlikely, given that I suspect Nintendo would have thought ahead on that count. And, well, it might be... Oh, no, there's still the tap and drag, so I don't think that'd be enough.
December 13th, 2020.
Wait, what?
Nintendo updated the requested damages from 4.4 to 4.95 billion yen, or around 34 million US dollars, citing the fact that the game had been available to download and had been earning money for 2 years since the lawsuit began.
That better not be history. Well, let's see if history... Well, what's the phrase? History may not repeat, but it does rhyme. Please don't rhyme when it comes to the other patent lawsuit you're dealing with right now.
April 13th, 2021. Nintendo updated their requested damages
What?
a
Hang
second
on.
time from 4.95 to 9.699 billion yen, or 66 million US dollars. They again cited the passage of time that had passed since filing their lawsuit in 2017. May 13th.
Although, I'm kind of surprised there isn't more diving into the arguments themselves. I think that would have been valuable, though, to be fair, given the channel we're looking at, I suspect it's not strictly focused on legal matters, so... Yeah, it's probably not strictly focused on legal matters anyways, so perhaps it's for the best that you aren't going into the arguments themselves since you're not a lawyer, presumably.
2021.
Best leave that to the actual lawyers, or perhaps... actually, I wonder how hard it would be to prod someone into researching the topic, maybe querying a lawyer to dig into it, though, to be fair, finding someone who has a good understanding of Japanese law that speaks English who can inform you of all this might be tricky to get, so fair enough on that count, but still, might be fascinating to do as a follow-up to dig into the legalese for that.
A legal representative from another game company said at least 60 to 70% of the case has taken place.
I would hope so.
It was looking like Kalopla's goose was cooked, as it were. So far, the case had gone entirely in Nintendo's favor. Every time Kalopla had claimed Nintendo's patents were invalid or that they didn't apply to Shironeko Project, the judge had ruled in Nintendo's favor.
Interesting.
And finally, August 4th, 2021, the case was over. Nintendo and Kalopla announced that they'd come to a settlement.
Well, I guess continually raising the pot was able to prompt them into action, huh?
Nintendo would drop the lawsuit and would allow Shironeko Project to remain in app stores. In exchange, Kalopla would pay Nintendo a settlement of 3.3 billion yen, or around $22.5 million.
I don't know if that necessarily equaled the lawyer's fees, given how expensive those can be, but never mind me.
We have decided that the best way to resolve this issue as soon as possible is through a settlement, Kalopla said. And that's how things wrapped up, at least for the most part. While internationally, most people knew nothing about this lawsuit, over in Japan it was hot news for a while. And the court of public opinion was firmly on Nintendo's side.
To be fair, Nintendo has the same cultural power as Disney did when I was a kid, so I guess it makes sense in that respect. I wonder how much of it, well, I wonder what their opinion is on the current litigation.
This is a fitting end for Kalopla, who trampled on Nintendo's kindness.
Is that a robot voice?
I'm a Shironeko Project player, but in this case, the only ones at fault are Kalopla, so I can't complain even if they get totally destroyed. This has all happened because Kalopla didn't just say sorry to Nintendo. Even a child knows how to say that. But Nintendo and Kalopla are now in a kind of funny position, because, like I said earlier in the video, Kalopla owns a few other game developers.
Oh, is this when you're wrapping around to this? Interesting that you're putting it in a title-length labeled conclusion. It might be hard to see, but this is labeled as a conclusion chapter, with how things are cropped on my screen right now.
Including Eighting and Mages. and both of those studios have co-developed games together with Nintendo,
Oh?
even while the lawsuit was dragging on. Pikmin 3 Deluxe was co-developed with Eighting, and the Famicom Detective Club remakes for Switch were co-developed with Mages. Those games
Really?
were released in 2020 and 2021 respectively, in the midst of the lawsuit with Kalopla, their parent company. Both studios have also developed follow-ups since the lawsuit ended, Pikmin 4 and Emio the Smiling Man, which suggests that Kalopla don't have too much bad blood over this incident.
I wonder, well, to be fair, with the cultural position Nintendo holds, I'm not sure, well, I'm kind of surprised that Nintendo was playing nice with them more so than Kalopla playing nice with them.
Or they need the money. But while most of the time Nintendo's legal actions feel a little slimy,
A little?
going after fan creators and so on, in this case they were doing it for the sake of the Japanese game industry's code of honor. Though I'm sure the 3 billion yen didn't hurt either. Hey, thanks so much for watching this video. So, unraveling the truth of this story took a lot of research and scouring through many Japanese news articles and interviews. If you want
Yeah, that would be rough, to be fair.
to help support more videos like this one, consider checking out my Patreon page at patreon.com/thomasgamedocs. Any kind of pledge helps out a huge deal. And on that note, thanks very much to my top tier Patreon supporters, Alison Withen.
Alright, so is it just going through those? Yeah, it looks it. Alright, we can call it there then. So, fair enough. Solid editing on that one. So, let's see, do I have time for another one, or should I call it there? Let's see, according to my notes, the next one's about 20 minutes, so... we were able to get through that one in about half an hour as well, but... no, I don't think I should take that risk. Darn, I was hoping on getting to the other one too. Okay, give me a second to add this one to a new new docket. Let's see. Yeah, that'll do. Okay, so I will mark this as... Well, so that was the 1214 one. Okay. Alright, that should help keep my notes in check for that one. Alrighty, so I guess that's what we'll call it then. So I was kind of hoping that I would have more time for this, but I am going to be, well, I'm going to be fairly busy getting ready for a couple different things. So I want to make sure that I give myself ample time to where I'm not scrambling. There's no sense trying to rush anything like that. So only an hour of this, but I'll need to make time for... Actually, I'm pretty sure there's even more beyond what I've put in the docket currently. I'm sure there's plenty that I can dig out as far as what's in the Discord right now. So to that end... So, for those of you who are newer to the channel, this is something that I do occasionally, just to recap that. So, effectively a matter of saying, hey, if there's something that you would like to see reaction content made out of, there is a Discord link in the description. Feel free to check it out. These tend to be more casual, and I generally say, alright, you can feel free to post whatever you like in there. The only stipulation is that I have, well, anything that you post there has no guarantee of actually being viewed, and I will mark it as such if it is being added to the docket or has been viewed. And I'll probably need to use a different color for, well, I think green is what I'm using for added to docket or viewed. And I think yellow for I'll check this out on my own time. I'll probably want to put in something separate if you want anything that if I see anything in there that might warrant a full response video, something that isn't just a raw reaction, but it's something that makes sense to do as just... words are failing me now. Something to do as something more like the Freerun video. Although, to be fair, it was probably a good thing that I focused more on the casual or industry stuff, because one does not always want to be talking about something super serious like the Freerun stuff anyway. Or at least, well, as amusing as it can be sometimes to look at how demon posters try and justify their positions, that doesn't necessarily mean you want to try it all the time. Or throw yourself at it, because I intentionally stay away from culture war bullshit for the most part, as I feel it's important to have a space where you can just unwind. And so I don't mind getting adjacent to it every once in a while, because that'll inevitably crop up. And I think any future responses or video essays will likely stay on this channel, but it'll be an uncommon occurrence. So, I guess to talk about talk about the plan for at least the rest of the year. My current focus as far as editing time is finishing a Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom review for a different channel. Link for that in the description as well. I've finished the audio editing component. I just have a few retakes I need to knock out. And then I'm on to putting audio to video, which should go fairly swiftly. My plan for that is to hopefully have that done by Christmas Eve, at which point I'll do an update stream since I haven't posted to the review channel in a while. Over on the review, I'll do an update stream over there, talking about where I've been, what I've been up to, and what you can broadly expect over there. There won't be too much relevant information for this, but there'll be the Echoes of Wisdom video after that. Well, released immediately after. It's actually kind of funny, because it'll be a good barometer for some bit of feedback I got on the review channel, because, funnily enough, the free run response video was actually sort of an experiment in that respect as well. Part of the reason why I did it is because I had started getting feedback on the review channel that my voice and line delivery had become too stilted because I was reading off of a script, and I was trying to be very precise with my punctuation, but that led to my vocal cadence to become very repetitive. So, ironically, the opposite problem that I was having relative to the free run video, where I decided to be much more raw and mostly focus on just doing one-take wonders and only doing retakes when it was absolutely necessary by my reckoning. And even then, I probably did need to do a couple retakes that for that free run video, but still, I think it turned out fairly well. And it has been fascinating to look at the reception for that video. I've not had a spike like this in viewership before. Holy crap. Not to this extreme. Maybe I should have put it on the review channel where it could have been monetized, but it only amount to about, what, $10 usually with my ad rate, but it's not as if I'm making a lot of money off of this. This is very much a hobby anyway. But I'm glad to have you stick around, bearing in mind that this channel is still primarily a Let's Play and live stream channel, but still, now that I have seen that there is potential in eventually dipping into the response video trend, although to be fair, this was an extreme circumstance, partially invoked by culture war bullshit, so, well, an unusual circumstance, not extreme. I don't know if I could capture this sort of lightning in a bottle again. I've got a couple of ideas for videos I could look at as responses. In fact, the Keep Your Politics to Yourself video essay I was talking about making in the free run video. There's one video in particular that might be worth making a response video to before I put out that Keep Your Politics to Yourself video, because I wanted to make sure, since that I am trying to act as Switzerland for the culture war, that I'm trying to act more so as escapist entertainment, or at least making sure that you know where to look for escapist entertainment in the case of the review channel. My objective there was effectively to say, alright, let's make sure I'm not just bashing one side of the aisle, and so I had found a rather unctuous individual who is unironically the straw man that game journalists have of gamers, just brought to life. I don't even know, well, honestly, I feel bad for the guy, whatever path his life went down for that to have even been the case, but I'm thinking that, alright, I first became aware of you from a video on God of War Ragnarok that a podcast I watched was keeping up with, that reviewed, and found wanting. So what if I tackle one of your videos for something that I am familiar with, such as either his Baldur's Gate 3 video or his Tears of the Kingdom video? I think his Tears of the Kingdom video will be the most interesting, though, because I already have my opinion on Tears of the Kingdom out in the wild on my review channel, and a little bit on here in the occasional time I streamed it, effectively saying, hey, I am someone who really hates open world games, or rather, I hate open world elements, because because game balance is my primary metric for judging gameplay once the basics like usability, user interface, control scheme are seen to. And because of that, with most games I play, it's a matter of saying, hey, if you're running into a problem, either there's a game balance issue of some stripe, or you just need to get good or change your strategy up. With open world games allowing you to go basically anywhere, you then have a third question put on. It's no longer game balance, get good, or it's no longer a matter of game balance or get good. It's a matter of game balance, get good, or get out of here. You're not ready for this yet. So that's something that really irks me about open world titles, and because of that, I did not resonate with Breath of the Wild, though Tears of the Kingdom fixed up most of my issues. So it'll be interesting because the video I'm thinking of, we agree that Tears of the Kingdom is not a masterpiece based on the video title, but I suspect my reasoning for why is going to be incredibly different from him. So I think on that count alone, it could be interesting, though this is all perspective until I actually watch it. Though it does require me to actually watch it, and I know that I'm not going to enjoy his opinion on certain aspects, but still, that is the price you pay when you're looking at videos that you're responding to in a critical light, right? Luckily, I do have instances like this where, hey, someone else has watched it and can recommend the video on some level, so definitely leave these open. I'll definitely be experimenting with more reaction stuff. I'll definitely be experimenting with more response stuff, so yeah. Should be an interesting time. But at least for the next couple of weeks, you're not likely to see anything like that. In fact, not likely for the rest of this year anyway. So my thinking as of right now is that my primary focus being the review channel and getting that back and working, well, getting some regular uploads back for there. That is going to be my main focus before Christmas. And after I'm done with that, I want to spend a bit more time on other projects as well, independent of YouTube. So mostly just fixing up my house because, well, there's a couple of things I want to work on, and I'll have plenty of time during the winter holiday. But otherwise, my thinking is that for the next few weeks on this channel, things are going to be things are going to be mostly business as usual. I'm uncertain as to whether to continue the Linux test streams because, honestly, I'm of two minds about it now because I've done 2 of them so far. And the first time I did it, it worked out really well because I was able to go into games that I knew for a fact would work pretty well in Linux because I'd either seen them as such or knew they had native Linux versions. And so there is certainly entertainment to be had, and I did enjoy doing that stream when it was either working properly or failing spectacularly. But with yesterday's stream, I'm of two minds about that because it felt wrong somehow to have someone looking over my shoulder as I was playing, Software Doctor. So, I don't know. Because there is, as with what I had mentioned in the Xenoblade stuff, there is a certain degree to which, there's the expectation to perform when you are live. And because of that, I'm wondering if it instead makes sense to, if I am going to go about this, perhaps it would be better to pre-record this instead. Perhaps to make highlights of just all the insanity that happens and structure it as that, rather than doing raw live streams. Because, let's be honest, that could get very tedious of, okay, we'll try this method. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, we'll do some research. Okay, try this method. Oh, that didn't work either. Damn it. Okay, so that could be interesting to some extent, but when it's a boring, for lack of a better word, kind of problem, like what we ran into with Baldur's Gate 2's native Linux version, where it just doesn't load, yeah, that's not a very fun, for lack of a better word, break. Because with Dungeons of Dreadmore the prior week, the fact that I ran into a problem with it going to the wrong monitor, the fact that I ran into trouble with it being able to apparently take up both of my monitors and looking absurd in the process. That was hilarious. Honestly, I should clip that entire mess out as its own thing, especially with how that run ended with me just getting obliterated because it's a roguelike, and of course I got obliterated by something I wasn't prepared for. Oh man. Well, we're checking that out, and there is a timestamp to that specific game and the VOD that I re-uploaded because apparently I'm not allowed to search through ProtonDB and assume it's safe for work. So, what the hell? Come on. Satisfactory. Come on. I'm just searching for that. Give me that game. Why did you give me something else that looked not safe for work on top of that didn't even have the same name? What the hell? Either way, all that to say, all sorts of stuff on the horizon. For now, though, it's going to be business as usual. I'm probably not going to worry about the Linux test on Friday. Instead, I think I'll probably just do a community night. Usually I do Mario Kart for that, but might be fun to do something different. Maybe use that as an excuse to go back and work on something that I know will work. Maybe showing off Deadlock could be fun, because I have tested that on my native, well, on this OS. That could be fun. Or I could break out TF2 or some other shooter. Ooh, actually, I wonder if Microsoft enabled Easy Anti-Cheat to where I could play Halo multiplayer. That could be fascinating, actually, because I know that I can set it to mod mode to where Easy Anti-Cheat won't be enabled, which means I won't have access to multiplayer, but I will have access to the single-player component. So I at least have that, but I wonder if I could get multiplayer to work. I'll have to research that. Either way, I'll probably do some sort of community nights on Friday, or maybe I could apologize for not getting through my whole docket today and just look at all that's left on Friday. And then, apart from that, we'll be back to the usual Xenoblade on Saturday. Well, Xenoblade 3 live stream on Saturday, Xenoblade 2 Let's Play stuff on Tuesday. And since I got thrown the mother of all story points in the last time I looked at Xenoblade 3, honestly, if I'm able to get... This is only perspective right now, but if I'm able to get far enough along with video editing for the Echoes of Wisdom review, I would probably want to, quote, celebrate by jumping back into Xenoblade 3 earlier than usual, especially since I technically missed a week in order to allow for the free run video to take up that time slot. So, perspective schedule next week, usual stuff on Tuesday, usual stuff on Saturday, maybe an extra Xenoblade stream on Wednesday, and probably a multiplayer community night on Friday. Or maybe just continuing the reaction content then. Either way, that should be all from me. So hopefully that all made sense and wasn't too rambly, but either way, thank you all for stopping by. Thank you very much for all the support over the last few weeks, and especially thank you to all the feedback on that video. There certainly have been some challenging comments in there, and it's definitely given me pause for thought on a couple things, even if there's a couple of points where you just laugh at a bug poster and think, oh, okay, yeah, go ahead, invoke Godwin's Law, yeah, that's definitely a good argument, but still, thank you all for stopping by. Thank you all for all the attention lately, and whether you're sticking around for the long haul or whether it's just a one and done, thank you all the same. So it is honestly kind of shocking to see that my sub count more than doubled over the course of this, but much appreciated. Hopefully I'll be able to keep your attention, hopefully, and if there's anything in particular you would want me to view, feel free to jump into the Discord and tell me directly. So no guarantees, as always, and I'm not going to be looking at not safe for work stuff, as you would expect, but either way, thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you all later.